triggers. We often have words or sounds or smells even that trigger certain feelings or behaviors. And we're going to talk about how we can create our own anchors for positive experiences. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, electrifying, energizing, illuminating all your cells, all your electrons and your molecules, and just radiating this brilliant light from the inside out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining stress, negativity, tension, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very, very softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, the tickling and the tingling, and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now, in these magnificent physical forms that enable us to experience life. So welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a new week, and it's a new month too, right? Is that yes, it is. I had to check. The days just fly by, but yes, it's a new week and a new month, and we get to be looking at anchors and triggers. So in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, one of the things that we do, and actually it's in hypnosis as well, is creating anchors that bring up a new state. Good morning, Bernadette. So good to have you here with us. Welcome. And we often get triggered in our lives by words that may be said, or by sounds that we hear, or by some kind of expression on somebody's face. And these triggers are things most often that we did not consciously design, that we didn't consciously create for ourselves, but they generate a response in us that is not always desirable. So we can recognize what those triggers are, and we could create new triggers or anchors, but we can also create anchors for positive experiences. And it's a powerful thing to be able to do for ourselves, to transform ourselves instantaneously. So I think we talked about the superpower poses, like when we can imagine ourselves as superheroes, and we take a superhero stance. And when you do that, you can generate all this amazing energy. And then that stance becomes an anchor for that shift of state. Now, yes, the thing about these triggers when anchors, when we're using them consciously, is that we need to remember to use them. Good morning, Robin. Welcome. It's been a while since you've been here. It's great to have you back. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. It's always good to have these morning times together. So we're talking about creating deliberate anchors to be able to access a positive state. And one of these, I love the superhero one. It's kind of brilliant, that maybe when we're facing something that we might not feel, we might have a sense of insecurity around, or maybe even if we're in a state of lack of energy or whatever, we can in a resourceful moment, create these anchors that then can bring us back to a more resourceful, positive state. So the superhero thing, like that's a really great thing to do, is like just take a minute. Maggie's sort of flitting around right now, Robin. So I'll say good morning to her for you. um, we when you're in a resourceful state where you have some extra energy, take a moment, maybe even take a moment now to just like stand up and get yourself in this superhero position and feel the power of that, and imagine your cape flapping in the wind, and the energy and the power and the confidence that fills that up, and feel that in your body. And you can use that stance to be able to anchor that, so that then when you get in that stance again, it's like pulling all those feelings back for you, makes them easier to access. And in hypnosis and in NLP too, you can, it doesn't have to be a trigger that, or an anchor that is so dramatic. It doesn't have to be something so dramatic, because you can't necessarily do that in the middle of a business meeting or something when you need confidence. But maybe when you're in that superhero presence, when you have that feeling, you could just tap with your finger on your knee to anchor that. And you can anchor it over and over again. An anchor can be something that simple. It could be something as simple as putting your finger to your face, or tapping your knee, or pulling on your ear, or it can be anything that you associate with this feeling. And the way to create the anchor is, as that feeling is arising, do that anchor, whatever it is, and then have the feeling arise again, and maybe even bigger the next time, and then do the anchor. And you can keep doing that, so that when you do the anchor, the feelings just generate. It's kind of like Pavlov's dogs, where they would ring the bell whenever the dogs would get fed. And ultimately, the dogs associated the bell with the feeding. And so when the bell was rung, the dogs would begin to salivate. And we're not very much different in that respect. We work the same way, where we can program ourselves. We are often programmed by our circumstance and programmed by the environment, but we can actually actively program ourselves to be able to access states that are potentially more desirable in a given instance or environment. Good morning, Josie. So good to have you here with us. So we're talking about anchors and triggers. And so there are many things that act or that act as triggers for us in our lives. And, we become sort of a minefield of all these triggers, all these buttons that are there waiting to be pushed by unsuspecting travelers through our territory, right? People say something, and all of a sudden we turn into this other person, where this other state is activated, and it's robotic. So what happens is that we're at the effect of all these influences that are unpredictable and uncontrollable, right? Because we're out in the world and things are happening. And what we do have the ability to do is to influence our own state of being. We don't have to be victims of the environment around us. So the ultimate cure, in big air quotes here, for that kind of reactivity is coming to a place of presence, ultimately, to be able to be present. And then we have the ultimate ability to be responsive rather than reactive. However, on the way there, we also can deliberately influence our state. of emotional welfare, right? We can create these anchors, and it can be fun, like we can bring ourselves to a place of experiencing love and connection. And as we sink into that experience deeper and deeper, we can create an anchor for ourselves that will be a reminder of that experience, that will not only be a reminder, but that will be neurologically wired and patterned to be able to create that experience. So then potentially, if we line these things up with the experience of love and connection, the experience of bliss, the experience of confidence, the experience of empowerment, as we anchor these different emotional and physiological states, because they are physiological. I mean, you can know that if you sit slumped in a chair, like as soon as I did that, as soon as I slumped down, my energy just went down. But when I sit up straight and I put my shoulders back a bit, it's a whole different experience. My heart is more open. I'm more awake and aware. Try it. You'll see there's a really big difference in the way that our emotions are connected to our physiology. Part of that is that that it's an anchor for like our different physiological states are anchors for emotions that had generated those states in the past. So, if we were feeling down and depressed, we were kind of slumped, and our shoulders would be down, and as soon as I do that, my whole body shifts. When I sit up straight, again, with the shoulders back, my chest is more open, my heart is more open, I'm more present, I'm more confident. And so as we become more alert to the impact of these different existing anchors, we can utilize them too. So when we're feeling down in the dumps, we can utilize those physiological anchors that are already there to help shift our state. Rubin says, yes, absolutely has effects on your well-being, how you carry yourself with movement. Exactly. And I think to your point, Rubin, you're talking about how you carry yourself with movement. So one of the things that I noticed too is that energy can become kind of stagnant. And one of the things that can shift us out of that is movement. Like if we bounce around, you can't bounce around and stay miserable. You just can't. And you can't stay miserable and smile. Like even if you're feeling miserable, if you smile, it starts to shift your being, because the smile is also a physiological anchor to a physiological chemical state, which impacts our emotions. So emotions can impact our chemical makeup, and our chemical makeup can impact emotions. We can influence our experience deliberately by accessing these triggers, but the foundation is that we need to recognize them first, right? So smiling is definitely an anchor. It's hard to cry when you're smiling. It gets really confusing, right? And it kind of disempowers the crying. Now, I'm not saying that that all crying is bad. Sometimes you need to cry, and just to allow yourself to move that energy, because emotion is energy. When we are stagnant, when we block emotion, we're blocking the movement of energy. It does change our physiology. There's an intimate connection between our emotion and our physiology. Different emotions carry different chemical states and different physiological states, different heart rates, different blood pressure. all kinds of different metrics shift when our emotions shift. So Rubin says, walk tall, stand proud, and be confident. Absolutely. Well, when we walk tall and stand proud, we are, by physiological experience, we are more confident. It just happens because those patterns have been so programmed. And so what I'm suggesting is that we can also deliberately, consciously program in new physiological connections, physiological and emotional connections. So one way to do it is by anchoring this state, for instance, the superhero pose. And then when you stand in the superhero pose, it's like, like it's coming back. Well, you might even create another anchor for the superhero pose by, for instance, tapping your knee or doing something that you could do in public without looking like a maniac, although it could be really interesting. I'm not advocating, but it could be really interesting to take the plunge and take a superhero stance in public. Not necessarily the most appropriate thing, but there may be moments where it could be exactly the perfect thing to be able to transform the energy wherever you are. I mean, I would imagine that regardless, it's going to transform the energy, but it wouldn't necessarily always be in a positive direction, I'm guessing, in the midst of a board meeting, perhaps, unless you gave it the proper context, in which, who knows, maybe everybody would join you. Anyway, what we're looking at here is how we really don't have to be at the constant effect of these triggers in our lives, that we have the ability to diffuse them by overriding them with a more powerful trigger. And in NLP, there's a really cool process that collapses competing anchors. So the negative behavior, you put it in one hand and you throw in all these negative things for the negative behavior, everything that is related to that. And in the other hand, you put in all these things that are for the positive behavior, and you power that up, like you superpower it. And you add in all these positive things and positive feelings and positive ideas and future projections and all that stuff, so that the weight of the positive hand is way, way greater than what was in the negative hand. But the negative hand still has its negativity, right? And then once you have those, the negative anchored in the one hand and the positive anchored in the other hand, then you put those hands together, and people, it's so interesting to see what happens. Like people go all kinds of weird while their brain is trying to figure out what to do with this rewiring. And it's a real thing. Here's Maggie. Good morning, Maggie. So it's a real thing. And we know that we learn both through carrot and stick, or we program both through carrot and stick. I think that we are pretty much wired to avoid pain, and I guess this is a little distracting, right? To seek pleasure and avoid pain. The strength of our impulse is more geared toward avoiding pain, unfortunately, than it is toward seeking pleasure or reward. But when we do have the choice, neurologically, when we have the choice between something that causes pain and something that doesn't, we move toward the thing that doesn't cause the pain. So that's why this reprogramming works. And I invite you to try it. When you're doing it, though, you really want to connect to the emotions of anchoring whatever the reality is for you of that negative pattern, and the reality of the possibilities of the positive and all the things that would be so much more beneficial for the positive. And you want to have an emotional connection when you do these things, because as you're adding those things, like deliberately adding those things, you are creating positive anchors, or you're acknowledging the negative anchors, right? So as you've strengthened those positive anchors, when you put those two things together, whew, I got a chill there, it's like your neurological system just needs to recalibrate. It just does it, because on your other than conscious awareness, or in your other than conscious awareness, it is making all those calculations that say, hey, I'd really rather I'd rather feel better, right? I think you guys know, if you've been here often enough, that years ago, for a big portion of my life, I was severely depressed. And I remember somebody telling me, just stop it. Just stop being that way. And the thing is, if you've ever been through an experience like that, or if you've ever had anxiety, or you've ever been fearful, somebody telling you, well, just stop it. That's the most absurd, ridiculous thing to tell somebody. Like, why would anybody, if they knew how to stop it, why would anybody continue feeling that way? Right? They wouldn't, because they just don't know. And there's so many anchors that are keeping them in place, they're sinking, right, with all these anchors. And this is a practice that you can use to support you in shifting some of those anchors and being able to create an alternate state. Now, I see the potential challenge in this, because, and I was going to say danger, but it's like the potential downside is that you might be using this technique to avoid things that really need to be resolved in some way or another. Like just shifting the behavior doesn't necessarily shift the underlying experience. So there are things that are occurring on multiple levels, but we do have the ability to repattern ourselves. So I can say from experience, depression is a habit. And it's not that it's not justified. It's not that there aren't reasons to feel unhappy, but at any given moment, anytime there's a reason to feel unhappy, there are reasons as well to feel happy. It's very much a pattern of focus. Anxiety, it's a habit. Fear, resorting to a space of fear, it's a habit. These are emotional and physiological patterns also. It's not to say that the underlying things don't need resolution. I do believe they do. And I do believe the emotion needs processing, but there are emotional patterns. So when we say things like, I'm depressed, like a beingness, which is not accurate, it's more like I feel unhappy, I feel depressed. It's not a constant state, but it may be the go-to state. It may be the state that the neurology, the physiology is patterned to. And when we shift those patterns by creating anchors and utilizing anchors that enable us to access alternate states, then the pipeline that was so powerful that led to the depression behavior or experience over and over, the pipeline starts getting chipped away at and ultimately can be redirected. So I hope this was useful. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. I so appreciate you and your contributions to this conversation every day. And I'm so grateful to you for your sharing and showing up so authentically, and it means the world. So until next time, give yourself an opportunity to be a superhero and to be able to um, access that at will. And also check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living and EWN One with the Earth. And I look forward to seeing you again.